Welcome to Quick Landmarks. Today we're stepping into a place of glittering halls, royal drama, and world-changing history. The Palace of Versailles, just outside Paris, France. A place built not just to be lived in, but to impress, control, and dominate. Every hallway, every garden, every mirror had a purpose, to show the world that the King of France held absolute power. Let's travel back to where it all began. Versailles didn't start as a palace at all. In 1623, it was just a small hunting lodge built by King Louis XIII, surrounded by forests and far from Paris. But his son, Louis XIV, had much bigger plans. Louis XIV, also known as the Sun King, believed that everything in France should revolve around him, and Versailles was designed to prove exactly that. Fun fact, the sun symbol appears hundreds of times across Versailles, carved into ceilings, gates, and furniture. In 1661, Louis XIV began transforming the lodge into the most extravagant palace Europe had ever seen. At its peak, more than 30,000 workers and 6,000 horses were involved in construction and maintenance. The palace eventually grew to over 2,300 rooms, 67 staircases, and nearly 700 apartments. By 1682, the palace was complete enough for Louis XIV to move the entire royal court there. This included nobles, servants, and officials, thousands of people living under one roof or nearby. But this wasn't just about luxury. By keeping the nobility close, the king could control them more easily. Even daily routines were turned into ceremonies. Watching the king wake up, get dressed, or eat dinner was considered an honor. Fun fact, there were different levels of access. Only the most important nobles were allowed to hand him clothing. Some nobles waited years for better rooms. Closer to the king meant more power. The most famous room is the Hall of Mirrors. This breathtaking gallery is lined with 357 mirrors, reflecting light from tall windows that overlook the gardens. Back in the 1600s, mirrors were extremely expensive, so this room wasn't just beautiful. It was a bold message. France is rich, powerful, and unstoppable. The king's state apartments were designed as a symbolic journey. Each room was dedicated to a Roman god, like Mars, war, Mercury, communication, and Apollo, the sun. Louis XIV associated himself with Apollo, reinforcing his identity as the Sun King. The ceilings weren't just decoration, they told stories of his victories and power. The king's bedroom was placed at the exact center of the palace. This wasn't accidental, it symbolized that all power radiated from him. Many walls in Versailles hide secret doors built into the paneling. These allowed servants to move unseen and maintain the illusion of effortless luxury. There were also hidden corridors and staircases for discreet movement of royals and staff. Despite the luxury, Versailles had very few permanent toilets. Nobles often used chamber pots or simply relieved themselves behind curtains or in the gardens. Perfume, incense, and flowers weren't just for fashion or decoration. It helped mask the smells. Speaking of gardens, they are masterpieces. The gardens of Versailles cover nearly 2,000 acres. They feature geometric lawns, tree-lined paths, fountains, statues, and canals. Every plant was carefully placed to reflect order and control, just like the king wanted. Fun fact, during royal events, the fountains were turned on only when the king walked by because there wasn't enough water pressure to run them all at once. Gardeners would run ahead, turning them on one by one to save water. Another fun fact, the Grand Canal is so large that full-size boats once sailed on it, including gondolas imported from Venice. Versailles was also home to Marie Antoinette, the last queen of France before the Revolution. Marie Antoinette even had her own private retreat on the palace grounds called the Petit Trianon. She even created a fake village where she dressed like a shepherdess, while real farmers struggled to survive. This play village is still standing today. After Louis XIV died in 1715, Versailles remained the royal residence under Louis XV and Louis XVI. However, France was drowning in debt, food prices were soaring, and anger was growing. Over time, the palace began to symbolize something else, not just power, but excess. In 1789, during the French Revolution, angry crowds marched from Paris to Versailles. The royal family was forced to leave the palace, never to return. For years, Versailles stood nearly empty. Furniture was sold, rooms were abandoned, and the palace slowly faded. At one point, people could buy palace furniture as souvenirs. However, in 1837, Versailles was transformed into a museum dedicated to French history. It would later host one of the most important events of the 20th century. In 1919, the Treaty of Versailles was signed in the Hall of Mirrors, officially ending World War I. Today, Versailles is one of the most visited landmarks on Earth, welcoming millions of visitors each year. Versailles isn't just a palace. It's a monument to power, beauty, ambition, and a reminder of what happens when luxury forgets the people. Thanks for watching Quick Landmarks. If you enjoyed this journey through history, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us for the next landmark. Fast, fascinating, and unforgettable.